Hey guys, Mr. Hyatt here. This is Chapter 3, Lecture 2. We left off talking about the pyramid of energy. Here we are kind of diving a little bit more deeply into the producers. So these two terms that are on your screen, gross primary productivity and net primary productivity, are really big ideas in this unit. If you've ever had a job, and you've looked at your pay stub and you see gross pay versus net pay, same idea. So the gross primary productivity is how much energy do all producers produce? How much can they capture from the sun? What's the most that they can possibly make? Then net is how much they can possibly make minus the amount that they have to use. So just like your net pay is your gross pay minus your taxes, it's what you take home, net primary productivity is going to be how much they can make minus how much they have to use for themselves. So the reason we care about net primary productivity is that's the amount that's available to the rest of the food web. We got to shift away from this human-centric idea that plants do photosynthesis for us. No, they don't. Plants do photosynthesis for themselves, to make energy for themselves. They just, fortunately, are really good at it, so they make extra energy. And then we come along, or a cow comes along and consumes that extra sugar, and then eventually makes its way to us. And so we benefit from it, but it's not the point. It's not the plant's goal in life to support us. So obviously, things like swamps and marshes and tropical rainforests and temperate forests and coniferous forests are going to make a lot of energy. Their net primary productivity is going to be high. Same thing is true of estuaries. If you don't know what an estuary is, that's where salt and fresh water meet. So typically we're talking about a river dumping into the ocean. Lots of producers live in estuaries. Again, not all biomes are created equally. The desert probably is not surprising that they don't make a lot of energy. There's a lot of sun there, but there's also not a lot of water, so it's tough for plants to survive. Moving forward, we need to be really familiar with these nutrient cycles. Hydrologic cycle is obviously going to be water, and then carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur are pretty easy to identify. But we need to be familiar with these. We need to be able to describe each of these, and we need to be able to pick out some of the key steps in each of these processes. So let's dive into the hydrologic cycle. There are three key portions to the hydrologic cycle. There's evaporation, there's precipitation, and transpiration. Evaporation is obviously going to be when things evaporate into the air. Precipitation is going to be the opposite, when water comes down. And if you don't know what transpiration is, make sure you understand it by the time you get back to school, because we're going to do a lab over transpiration where you'll understand it really well. So definitely understand the basics before August 8th when we come back. Again, we're focused on the water cycle, the hydrologic cycle. We mess with the hydrologic cycle. We mess with all nutrient cycles, but here's how specifically we deal with the water cycle. We take huge amounts of fresh water out, mostly for irrigation, but also for human consumption. We need fresh water. We clear vegetation, which impacts the water cycle because trees are great reservoirs to hold on to water. And then we increase flooding when wetlands are drained because we don't have anywhere to catch the water. Here's a picture that shows it. Same picture as in your book. Make sure you understand precipitation, there's transpiration, and there's evaporation. Condensation, I think, makes sense. Here are the ways that we humans impact the water cycle. So really a good summary picture. Keep in mind that glaciers store huge amounts of fresh water. So there are, of the small percentage of water on Earth that's fresh water, a lot of it is locked up in glaciers. So there's even less available than we tend to think that there is. Since we're talking water, let's talk about the science focus. That's that blue inset box in your book. We need to make sure we're familiar with and comfortable with water's unique properties. So a lot of water's versatility is due to the fact that water is not neutral. if we look at this picture, we've got a partial negative charge and a partial positive charge. That's going to lead to hydrogen bonding that's going to connect the molecules. It's going to give it some special traits. So it's going to be a liquid over a large range of temperatures because those bonds can form and reform and break and do all those types of things. It has a high specific heat, meaning it changes temperature slowly. If you've ever jumped in a pond or a lake here in Indiana in the springtime, you know the water stays cold longer than the air does. Same thing, or I guess the opposite effect happens in the winter time or in the fall. It has adhesion and cohesion, so water sticks to itself. Water sticks to itself and it sticks to other stuff really well. Water expands as it freezes, which isn't always the case. It's a great solvent. We can dissolve lots of stuff in water, and water filters out harmful UV, which is important for aquatic organisms. Again, most of this, if not all of this, can be explained by the fact that water has partial charges and can make these hydrogen bonds really, really easy. Moving on to the carbon cycle. Make sure you understand the link between photosynthesis and respiration. All organisms do respiration. Producers do photosynthesis, but even producers do respiration. Make sure you understand that those two processes, those two chemical equations, are exactly opposite one another. We add a ton of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which messes with the carbon cycle in major ways. We do that through burning fossil fuels. We tear down trees. We're deforesting still at ridiculous rates, and that kind of hurts us in two ways. Number one, we burn fossil fuels to tear down trees, but number two, trees are the best removers of carbon dioxide that we have. So we're taking out the thing that could make up for the damage that we're doing to the environment. Here's a picture of the carbon cycle. Again, sometimes it's in the biosphere, in bodies of animals, things along those lines. Sometimes it's in the geosphere, and it turns into turns into fossil fuels or something like that. Sometimes it's in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So be comfortable explaining this picture as well. What you're looking at on the screen now is the levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide. We're going to spend a ton of time on this. We'll keep coming back to this throughout the whole year. But the strongest indicator of human contributions to climate change is on the screen right now. As carbon dioxide levels increase, temperatures increase, and conditions change. Now transitioning to the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is really important in terrestrial biomes, in land-based biomes. It's typically the limiting factor for plants. So nitrogen fixation is a really big process. That's the reason that we rotate crops in farm fields, because beans can fix nitrogen. And that means turning nitrogen from gas into a usable solid form. So without getting too far into the weeds, so to speak, nitrification and denitrification are the two big ideas. Are we turning nitrogen into something usable, or are we sapping the nitrogen? In terms of nitrification, we're turning ammonia into nitrate. Nitrate is good because we can use it. Nitrate ions turn back into nitrogen gas when we denitrificate, if that's the correct word. So it's kind of the opposite of fixing carbon. One of our focuses here is how bacteria fix nitrogen. Excuse me. So we intervene, we mess with the nitrogen cycle in several ways, and you see those right here. Nitrates are one of the two main pollutants in water. Because of farming, because of runoff, we add too many nitrates to the field, they run off, and they end up in bodies of water, which causes all sorts of issues. There's a picture of the nitrogen cycle. Phosphorus cycle, the key to the phosphorus cycle and kind of the trivia to the phosphorus cycle, which is often what gets tested over, is that it does not involve the atmosphere. So it is Like I said, along with nitrates, phosphates are the limiting factors for plant growth. That's why most of our fertilizer that we put down is a mixture of phosphorus and nitrogen. We, of course, impact the phosphorus cycle by deforesting, using large amounts of phosphate as fertilizer, and then erosion causes that to enter the water, which again causes algal blooms. There's a picture of the phosphorus cycle. Again, the key there is that it does not involve the atmosphere. Sulfur, really similar to the carbon cycle. We've got hydrogen sulfide, we've got sulfates. We release tons of sulfates in burning fossil fuels, things like coal and oil and gas from our vehicles and things like that. Again, we impact this nutrient cycle in major ways as well. This is kind of a continuation of our what is environmental science kind of a discussion. So in environmental science, it's really common to do what's called muddy boots biology, where we go out in the field. We increasingly are using things like GIS, which is satellite imaging that lets us overlay maybe land use or things like that over a satellite image, which lets us more and more do remote research, do laboratory research, as opposed to being out in the field, which is always cheaper and more cost effective and things like that. Those types of things are increasing. GEOS is an example of one of these information systems, but something like Google Earth is a great example. We can collect data, we can study the whole world without having to travel there. But of course, like I said, we can study it in the laboratory. We can create artificial ecosystems. We can do things in greenhouses. We can create things like biodomes that let us study ecosystems in the laboratory. Again, that's not real cost effective to build a massive building like that. And of course, scientists use models, computer simulations, mathematical models, but we have to start somewhere. So that always requires legwork, always requires field work and laboratory work, and you have to build the model. So you have to be a strong math person. You have to be able to code, usually things along those lines. Here's the 3 big ideas from this from this chapter. So make sure you're familiar with them, and that is chapter 3.